Super Mario Maker 2 is a great game, and judging by the sales numbers, about 5 million other people agree with me. But almost a year later, how does this game hold up? When I reviewed this game, it was really cool. Heck, I give it an 8 out of 10. But does it still have that same lasting impact as with its older predecessor? Well, today, that's what we're going to discuss here. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Kardino, and was I the only one that noticed Nintendo's weird habits of naming their third games 2? I mean, who could forget the sheer quality that was the 3DS port? Anyway, that's for another day. Today though, we're talking about the latest entry on the Nintendo Switch, and I think it's fair to say that this game had a weird schedule. Like I said, the original Wii U version was an immense success. Heck, even mentioning the Wii U, one of the first games I think about is Super Mario Maker. However, I feel like almost a year later, the sequel didn't quite have that same impact. In fact, before the most recent update, I hadn't opened the game for months. Now, I know there is an active community for this game that stuck around, but again, it's weird that a game that did so well on the Wii U didn't even match the sales as Super Mario Party or even Bowsette New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. So, taking another look at this game, was this truly as great as it seemed at launch, or was it just another flash in the pan that fizzled out? First off, I think it's worth noting that, first and foremost, this game is a sequel. As we've established, it's technically the third game in the series. As such, this game was purely magical for a lot of people, but for most dedicated Nintendo fans, the core concept wasn't exactly new. Not saying this game wasn't amazing, but the novelty of actually making your own levels was already the key feature of its older sibling. As such, the staying power of this game already had a somewhat threatened lifespan. After all, once the main novelty is worn off, the main appeal of a sandbox game more or less boils down to what's new. It sounds harsh, but I do think to a certain extent at least, it's true. Luckily in this department, I feel Mario Maker 2 hit the ground running, and there is no shortage of new content here. This means that old and new players will find new ways to enjoy the game regardless of their history with the franchise. Power-ups, themes, assets, there's so much stuff to dig into here. Of course, there is one problem with the creation process, and that's the controls. You see, the original game was built around the main controller for the Wii U, so now that was taken out of the equation, the team need to find a compromise for the gamepad. I know, remember this thing? It was clunky, had a terrible battery, had a connection strength of a hotspot through cement. Yeah, that's it. For those of you who don't know, the thing that made the first game so fun and accessible was the fact that you didn't need to learn a deep interface in order to start creating levels. Instead, all you need is a touchscreen and you're good to go. It was as simple as just dragging things where you want them to go, similar to drawing or playing a mobile game on your smartphone. As heathen of a thing that is to say for a console gamer. Even on the 3DS, it translated over fairly well because, again, the touchscreen was an integral part of the device that didn't impede your concentration. On the Switch though, when you're playing in docked mode, you don't have such a controller, leading to an interface that, while it could have been made a lot worse, sometimes makes level design feel more clunky and slow overall, especially now that this game doesn't feel so fresh anymore. Again though, I think the worst part about this is that I really don't know how Nintendo could have made this better. Now in the handheld mode, this problem is more or less fixed, but I feel like most people in the creation mode will prefer to use the TV. Now to clarify, it isn't a huge issue, and I feel like once you get into the groove of things, you tend to excuse these problems. But if you were to ask me which control scheme I prefer, there'd be no contest. It's one of the problems of making a sequel to a game that relied on a gimmick you won't have most of the time anymore. The next topic I'd like to discuss is about the updates. When I first reviewed this game, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I felt like the mediocre online modes along with clunky building UI made an otherwise fantastic game just great. I know, what a tragedy, right? A game being great. What does our world come to? Oh no. Looking at it now though, I feel like looking objectively, I'd give it about a 9. Now you can play with friends, you can make and share your own worlds, and the asset palette got a ton of new stuff. However, one thing that did surprise me was the lack of updates this game got. We got two major ones, the one in December that gave us the Link power-up, and the one in May which allowed us to essentially make our own games. Compared to the Wii U game, this is pretty surprising since they basically just kept rolling out updates for that game from day one. Now granted, Mario Maker 2 started with a lot more, but I can't help but feel like it was comparatively under-supported nonetheless. I feel like after a couple months of silence, the game just stopped having a mainstream following. When Nintendo dropped their trailers, it seemed everyone first went, "Oh yeah, Mario Maker 2 exists," followed by, "What took them so long?" Now granted, the second update was probably delayed due to 2020 just being a really bad year, so I can't exactly knock them too hard for that. The last thing I want to mention is actually just a bunch of little exclusions that I feel were just kind of odd. Not that they made the game worse per se, but just kind of bland, I guess is the closest word. For example, I missed the costumes that you could include in the original Mario Bros. Mode. When I made that review, I didn't think I missed them as much, even to the point where I didn't mention their absence at all. Now though, I miss those types of levels which revolved around a single character. Sure, you can have Link, but what about those Metroid levels where you ran around as Samus, or the ones where you played a Mario Kart race? Sure, you can still make those types of levels, but I still have to wonder why those costumes weren't included. And it's not like these significantly changed the gameplay or unlock system either. You could either unlock them using your amiibo, or you could just use event courses to unlock them instead. What's more, Nintendo's already doing event courses with the Ninja speedruns, so I'm not sure why these would be such a big problem to implement. Or here's another thing missing, what about the 100 Mario challenge? In my opinion, just browsing random levels isn't really as fun as playing through 16 levels with limited lives. It was a fantastic challenge. Actually, out of all the modes I played from the original, this one was probably the one that kept me coming back. Sure, some of the expert courses were, well, garbage, but I feel like for the most part, the bad levels are generally rooted out by the boost system this time. Well, most of them anyway. I don't know, Endless Mode just doesn't really have that same appeal to me. There's no motive here. What goal are you trying to achieve? Getting a global rank? Please. To me, this thing is an arbitrary number that doesn't even matter that much. I think the problem that I was searching for earlier is that this game feels a little vanilla. Like, in the first game, you had the costumes, you had the weird mushroom, you had the Easter eggs on the title screen, you had that fly minigame. Mario Maker 2 has the occasional funny intro every now and again, and that's about it. Now, I'm not going to pretend like this is a big detrimental issue to this game or anything. It just kinda reminds me of their Nintendo Directs, clean and optimized, put everything in there that needs to be in there, and maybe add one or two little jokes on there or something if you're lucky. It's nothing that keeps me up at night or anything, but it's just something I look at every now and again and go, man, that's a bummer. Anyway, to summarize, I think this game is still fantastic and is definitely worth a buy if you're into user creation games. Sure, the controls aren't as inviting with the Wii U, what with the touch controls being far simpler to navigate, the online single player content wasn't too extensive for several months, and the game didn't always have that vibrance as the first game. However, these issues aren't really as pressing as I remembered them being when beginning this video, and it's still a blast to play. Plus, like I said, there's an active community surrounding this game, and there's plenty of content here. Like I said, I'd probably rate this game a 9 out of 10 if I were reviewing it again, now that the updates have been completed. I still think objectively, this game is amazing, especially with the story mode, which for the first playthrough is still really entertaining. But I wonder how much better the game would have done if things had just been a little bit different. Because when you're beaten by New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, you know there's something missing. Actually, this game reminds me of Splatoon 2. It was a sequel that was pretty much guaranteed to happen, and both sold extremely well. Additionally, both games built where their predecessors left off, while still leaving room for more features. But I have to say that in the long run, Splatoon 2 got much more love and support over time. Again, not saying that Mario Maker 2 failed, but were you to ask me which game in the series was more significant, I'd have to go with the original. But that's just my opinion. What about you? Do you still play Mario Maker 2 today? Be sure to leave your opinions in the comments below, and I'd love to start a conversation. In the meantime, however, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.